Hi guys, and welcome back. Today we'll get on with building the diorama base for the German 88mm gun. So as usual, I'm just using the 18mm dressed pine to create the frame and the supports within the frame to hold the base together. So just laying out all the pieces here and making sure that I've cut off the required amount of little supports. And then back inside to the hobby room to start gluing it all together with liquid nails. And I am reasonably careful to clean up any of the glue that squeezes through. It just makes it easier later on. And if you don't do it, then it will show up when you do the staining. Just marking up the base now on that corflute type plastic corrugated material, which I think this brand is Quill, but they're all pretty much the same. Really light, but very strong. Now the thing tends to square itself up naturally, so I don't get too stressed out about having T-squares and the like, but this needed to go into a very specific space on the shelf because it's a accompanying piece to the Castle Ida diorama. So while it was all still a little bit wet, I slipped it into the shelf there to make sure A, that it did fit. I dry fitted it, so I was confident that it would, but that it then glued in that space. So it's set while it was in that spot, so it was the right fit as I moved it in and out over the course of the build. Now I'll let that dry for a good 15 or 16 hours, I guess, and then it was time to I like putting the felt on the base. Normally I have just a big roll of felt and stick it on with white glue, but I thought I'd try this self-adhesive felt, which seemed to work pretty well. I also wanted the gun to look like it was pointing uphill, up towards the castle, so started to build a little bit of height on the left-hand side of the diorama base as you look at it, just to give it a slight elevation. It's not a huge hill, just the beginning of. These are just cut from balsa wood. I think it's only 1 mil, maybe 2 mil thick. And the white polystyrene foam that I'm sticking down is just from packaging material for things like, televisions or laptops or whatever you might buy over the journey. I always save it. I've got a little pile, well, a big pile, to be honest, in the garage, and that just sticks quite nicely with white glue. Can make a mess, so if you're cutting, use a really sharp blade, and ideally do it outside where it doesn't matter if you get too many little beads of white foam everywhere. And finally, just a little bit of painter's masking tape will help hold everything together. And again, I would leave this overnight, so probably a good 12 or 15 hours until I touch it again. And just finish all that off with some white glue, fairly thickly applied, firm everything up and give the clay something to hang on to. So we're on to getting some ground down, and I use the DAS clay, the air drying clay. And it's pretty self-explanatory. I squeeze it out to about the thickness that I want and then just spread it on, pushing down firmly so it gets good contact. And it's just a matter of building it up and getting it pretty much where you want it to be before you try and put a little bit of surface texture into it. So we'll just have a look at this for a minute or so and I'll come back. I just use a really cheap craft sponge, just a little bit of foam on the end, or sponge on the end, and push that down, and that just gives takes away the smooth texture and just gives it a little bit of irregularity in the surface. You won't see much of this anyway because it's going to be covered in grass, but old habits die hard. Now, having let the clay dry for a couple of hours, and you can just see around the edge where it's starting to go a bit paler white, I like to get the parts of the diorama on just to get a little bit of registry in the surface, so just to push them down so, I get happy with where everything is and then more or less lock it in by pushing down and creating a place for it to find later on once I've done the rest of the grass and the like. Also gives me a chance now to sort of play around with the figures about exactly where they'll be, because it's sort of been in my head up to this stage, but you're never 100% sure until you start to get everything in, see what space you've got available and see what makes logical sense in terms of what their movement is. So watch this for a minute, we'll get back into it shortly. Here I'm just protecting the frame with some painter's masking tape, some low tack, so I won't leave any residual, and it also means when I take it off after the base is predominantly finished, I can give it a light sand just to make sure it'll take the stain nicely. And then it's a quick spray with some brown, dark brown base coat. Again, probably won't see this through the grass and other stuff, but it's always good to have it there just in case. What you don't want is white patches peeking out at you once you've done everything else. And then once that's dry, I put some more white glue down on the base and then sprinkle dirt onto it. And it's sieve dirt from my backyard, so it's reasonably fine. Put it on relatively thick and then shake and brush off any of the surplus. Again, this is more about preparing the base for the grass work so that there aren't any white patches that shine through later on. Now we're getting close to the end. I know there seems to be lots of stages to it, but if you don't rush and you've got other things to do in between, you can let things dry. So back now, the next day, more white glue down. It's full of white glue, this thing. And that's pretty generous, so that can take the static grass with the electric charge through the static applicator. And for this, I'm using the ground up scenery, and it's a summer blend grass. So I actually went through that process twice and did the grass again on top of the grass because I wanted it to be really thick and a little bit tall. So then I could push it down to represent where the tyres had rolled through when the gun was being delivered and where the bogies had been rolled to, the Kuba wagon turning up, and even some of the footprints, or not footprints so much, but the paths that the troops had been walking along, which had flattened down the grass as well. So just started that process, you guessed it, with very heavily diluted white glue. A little bit of dark pastel into the wheel ruts and tyre marks. And a little bit of gardening in the tree line to thin the grass out, ready for some forest scatter. And this is actually more gardening that I've done here than I've done in the backyard for the whole year. And for this I'm using Nature in a Pot. And that's just some random scatter. I like this stuff. It is not too big, and I just sort of scatter it on. I'll come back in later on with some white glue to set it in place. But try and avoid any of the big stuff. You'll see me probably coming back in and picking some of the stuff off and just trying to get it looking as natural as I can. And occasionally I might do a specific piece of planting, just to show I've got a green thumb. also whack in some random sea sponge stuff, which always looks good. And pretty much finishing that up now with just a few random placements of some foamy underbush stuff. Now I'm just applying a random selection of pastels just to taste, just to break up so it's not all exactly the same colour. Some of it's a bit subtle. Probably won't come through great in the video, but it does break it up for the eye when you're looking at it in normal light. And the last thing to do is to give it a coat of clear. And for this, because it doesn't matter, I decided to use that crap SMS flat. So I get some value out of the purchase. So the first thing to do is to get that masking tape off. And that's not going to leave you with perfectly clean edges, so you're going to need to do a little bit of cleaning up here. And because I did the grass so thick, also a little bit of trimming, a little bit of lawn mowing with the scissors to get that under control around the edges too. Definitely in the home straight now, so you'll see me putting the stain on and doing about 4 coats of that over the journey and a light sand between the second and then the last, and then hitting it with the gloss coat, and I think doing 3 coats of that sanding between the first and the second, and came up to a pretty good shine, so I was happy with that. Time to get the trees in now, so mixing up some 2-part epoxy resin glue. Putting on a good gloop of glue, and yes, gloop is a modelling term. And then because these trees will actually be pushed hard against the back wall of the shelf, just moving into position here, and then tinkering around with it and ingenious use of a little bit of wire to make sure they glue in the upright position appropriately. And that's it. So we'll just have a look at the final reveal now and do a few laps on the magic spinning wheel, and then some more detailed close-up pictures along the way, and then I'll come back to say goodbye. So thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it and hopefully maybe picked up one or two little tips along the way. I have to say that I'm pretty happy with it. I think it's come up well. Dio bases are always interesting because the vision in your head and then what you're able to translate onto a three-dimensional finished product are sometimes two very different things, but this came out really close to what I was imagining, so really pleased with the outcome. And as I said, hope you enjoyed. So again, thanks for watching. Like if you liked, subscribe, click the bell so you get reminders, share because that's helpful apparently. And as always, guys, look forward to your comments and we'll respond to them all. And I'm getting excited, only 2 more packages to come. So take care everyone, and I will catch you in the next one, which will be the final reveal of the 88 Dio.